Now, Simon Laird has been with Google since 2014. Google New Zealand is massive, and over the last 4 years, he's partnered with New Zealand's largest retail brands, supporting them on their digital transformation journey. Please here he is. Come on up to the stage, Simon. I'll get rid of that for you. That's yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a really fantastic lunch. And as you've just heard, I'm Simon Laird, so the Head of Sales and Partnerships for Google New Zealand. But yeah, I've spent about the last 4 years of the 8 or so that I've been with Google working with the retail industry as our retail lead. I was person number, I think 13 in the New Zealand office, and we've now grown up to a team of about 70 at Google New Zealand. So a pretty amazing time to be part of the business as it has grown at that rate. There we go, it is going to work, that's good. It's safe to say that we have seen some pretty significant changes in the retail space over the last few years, or a couple of years specifically. But really, when we think about it, it's not a whole lot of really new or different stuff. It's more acceleration of the trends that we had already been seeing. So people have always been curious and demanding and impatient. And we've seen that really sort of just continue over these last couple of years with lockdowns and COVID and staying at home lots. So to demonstrate this, I want to talk to some information or some trends that we have seen across the industry or across search in general. This data is all taken from Google Trends. So if you want to dive into it a little bit more or understand it yourselves, then trends.google.com, you can go on there and do comparisons of any sort of search volumes or categories and look at how they have been changing over the years and drill down by even to New Zealand and different parts of the country. But we've taken some of the bigger spikes and topics that we have seen and plotted them up here. So let's go back to a bit earlier on in the pandemic, and it was something that captured a lot of people's attention, Tiger King. So despite taking the world by storm and being pretty much everything, or the only thing that people talked about on video calls for an extended period of time back in 2020, it's a relatively small blip on the search timeline. If we skip forward a couple of years, but similar vein, we see Squid Game showing up. So a slightly bigger jump, and it hung around that tiny bit longer as well. Now, different theme, not Netflix themed this time, but a different sort of category. So a product search, and again, one that was, I know if we ask Dom or any of the guys that are working with the Countdown team, a really big concern right at the start of the pandemic was the toilet paper rush of 2020. And I know that managing that was a huge problem, but again, on here, it wasn't a massive sort of blip that we saw. If we skip to, again, a more recent one, so rat tests, so a much larger spike as those became available in New Zealand and people were hunting for where they could buy them right as they were coming out and were made available to the general public. And then the last one that's a little bit different is masks. And you can see that while there have been the huge jumps that we have seen previously or throughout this time, you can also see that it's been a bit more steady, a bit more maintained. It's not sort of that flash in the pan that we've seen with the others. I think what's interesting when we have a look at this is that a lot of these terms or a lot of the things that we're seeing here, it's really an indicator of how people turn to the internet or turn to online environments to find out that extra information. But I think what's fascinating about it for me is how short-lived some of these things were. They were really big events in our lives or big topics of discussion or purchase. But they sort of came and they went again really, really quickly. And I think this is representative of a wider trend that we are seeing across how people are using the internet, and specifically in the retail space. So whether it's looking for the essential things to get them through lockdowns or the sort of twisted psyche or trying to understand the twisted psyche of Joe Exotic, people do turn to the internet. And we have a lot of businesses coming to us and saying, how do we predict these terms? How do we really understand when they are coming through? And the difficulty is that for a lot of them, You won't be able to. However, by working or making sure that your business is aligned to be properly utilizing technology and being set up to be more agile, it's going to mean that you can react to them a whole lot quicker, and you might actually start to figure out some of them before they come down the pipeline. All right, so I've got three main themes that I'm going to sort of run through in my time today. And the first one is the idea that inspiration for shopping is everywhere now. So the majority of consumer journeys do play out online in some format. So regardless of where they make that final purchase or where they actually buy the product, online plays this enormous role in pretty much, or in most shopping journeys now. And as retailers and as businesses, we must think about not just how how that transaction is happening, but how can we really think differently about how we can inspire customers? So help them find those new products and get that information that they are looking for ahead of time. The next one is the idea that commerce is really continuous now. So shopping never sleeps, and when people look for a product, it's always on, and they're fulfilling one need and then immediately jumping onto the next one. So we need to think about how we can have that technology and infrastructure in place so that we can really react to those quickly. And the last one that you can do to help your business realize this continuous commerce that's going on all the time is to really lean into and engage with technology. I've mentioned it a couple of times already, but focusing on insights, focusing on the platforms that you have been building out so that you can really capitalize on this. I'm going to dive into each of these sections a tiny bit more now. Discovery can really start anywhere, and traditionally, as we've shifted towards online shopping, we're also seeing people using the platforms and technology very differently as well. So originally, we saw a lot of people going online to find cheap prices for things. Now, we see increasingly that people are looking for the best item for them. They are looking to find a range of items and evaluate all of their choices before they go into a store. And this is very different to, I guess, the traditional marketing ideas that a lot of people here would have known or been taught about back at school or university, if that's the way you went. Where if we take a step back to before click and collect was really a thing or a regular part of everyday life, shopping inspiration was traditionally thought to be in a handful of moments. Somebody would have a need, and then maybe a few days later, they'd walk into a store and actually make a purchase. Or they'd see a TV ad or get a catalogue in their letterbox. And again, it would sort of trigger the start of that journey that would end a few days later, or they might head out later that day to purchase. We designed our communication strategies around the idea that these handful of events were the really key moments that we had to capitalize. And they would see this trigger and take an action as a result. Now, though, there are millions more of these triggers that can kick off the shopping journey. And so these journeys also are not as simple as they used to be. They loop around and start and stop and kick off, and somebody might stop or start researching and find out they don't actually want to buy something. So all of these can happen before they actually set foot in the store. There are infinitely more of them, and more than ever, people will hopefully have heard of the term these micro moments, or as Don was talking earlier, the zero moment of truth. So when people are, it's no longer sort of those triggers necessarily. It might be when they notice they've got a hole in their running shoe. It might be when they realize they don't have the ingredient to make tonight's dinner in their pantry like they thought they did. And instead of going, okay, well, I'll go out to a store and have a look, and when I've got some time in the weekend, I'll go and see if I can fill that need. Instead, they've got this amazing device in their pocket that allows them to do it pretty much on the fly. And they are doing that. They're fulfilling that need or that want for information immediately. It's super powerful, but as brands, it's a little bit scary as well, because it means that instead of us talking to our customers in the way that we traditionally have, it means they're going to come to us. They're going to ask for information when it suits them. And that's a very different dynamic to what we've had before. We 100% see this in the data. So we know that Kiwis are turning online to find this information more than ever, and about 8 in 10 of us are actually using the internet to research our purchases before we go into a store. And we know that about 7 in 10, so a big chunk of that are using Google platforms to do that. It's a pretty established part of our shopping journey. And for a lot of people, it really does start with search. So we saw the examples earlier on, but when you're shopping in the retail space, it's a little bit different to the rest of the shopping environment or to the rest of the searching environment on Google. So when customers come to us, they're presented with a slightly different view. And this really is the new store shelf for a lot of brands. So instead of walking into a shop and looking at the different options that they have, people are starting that journey really early. And retailers now have the opportunity not just to show up in this space, but to show which items are available in store, where the nearest store is, whether they're discounted, do some price comparison, and it's a really good opportunity to show up. The flip side of this is that there's also an opportunity for a whole lot of smaller or other brands that aren't necessarily in your consideration set to show up as well. So we can see, we've had both of the supermarkets chatting a little bit earlier on, but I think it's really interesting to see that there's a whole lot of other players that can show up in this space and really compete. It's not the traditional competitors that you just have to consider. We know that this research is happening more than ever before because we can see that the growth in search numbers that's coming through is significantly higher than the overall growth in retail sales across the country. So we know that people are doing more of that research, more thought is going into each and every single purchase decision before it actually happens. I think Dom was talking about some of the trends that we'd seen earlier. I think it's a real interesting one in the grocery space. Quinoa has traditionally been the most searched for individual grocery item in the country for years. It has always been, and whether it's people wanting to find out what the heck it is, or it's people wanting to know more information about how to cook it, just the word quinoa has consistently been the most searched for individual grocery item. In the last 2 months, cheese has overtaken it. So again, it's a really interesting sort of change in dynamic. It's no longer just about the interesting products that people are going out for. They're doing that price comparison. They're looking for products and information that they can get right now. Search is really only one area that they are doing this, though. So YouTube is another area where we're seeing increasingly it can spark that inspiration and plays a much wider role in that whole purchase journey. We know that it can play a part in sort of the branding or the traditional role of video, where you go out and put out your big brand campaigns on a whole bunch of different screens. But increasingly, it also is utilized for actually making purchasing decisions or playing into sort of that brand versus performance or the brand versus retail part that was talked about in the previous sessions. 59% of viewers in New Zealand say that advertising ads on YouTube actually drove them to consider buying from a product, and about half of us, or half of the viewers in New Zealand, actually went in and bought something as a result of seeing videos about it. So it's a pretty significant component, and it's nice to think about sort of that social commerce element being up and coming. I think when we think about the ways that we can activate it right now, it's very much already here. This presents us with a really good opportunity because unlike a lot of traditional channels, we can also augment the way that we are targeting or utilizing these platforms. So we have the ability to target our videos to users who are actively in market or are showing intent to purchase in the short term. And it's not just targeting options. We can also complement your YouTube activations with products. So making it super easy for somebody to actually click directly onto an item and purchase it after seeing it integrated or seeing it alongside your ads. This information is all pulled out directly from your Google Merchant Center or your shopping feed and can be linked up to these in a whole lot of different ways. So The interesting thing is that it's available across the funnel. So traditionally, this was rolled out as a way of really driving that retail or performance layer. So it would tie in and you could optimize it towards a return on investment across your ads setup. Now, increasingly, we're seeing it expand across the platform, and even your larger scale branding activities, you can align this to and give people that additional engagement option or allow them to click through and buy stuff. A great example of activating this, there's some really awesome case studies out there, but the Iconic out of Australia worked with our Creative Works team in AUNZ and did some really cool activations here where they actually tied in the individual products that were shown below the ads into the items that people were wearing in those ads themselves. And then to take it a step further, they actually sort of had the athletes engaging with the viewer, so telling them they could skip or they could shop. In this case, it was so they could get out of the awkward yoga position or they could drop the weights. So there's some really cool and interesting ways that you can play with these formats and think about doing them differently. And you don't have to have an enormous budget. It's not just for the largest brands. Because you can go as targeted or as performance-focused as you like with a lot of this stuff, you really can start to activate it right now. For us, it won't end there with just YouTube or with search. We're looking at additional ways that we can tie in things like voice activations, so with more smart speakers at home or assistants built into your phone again, where there's more ways that it can come through there. Or another example that we released at Google I/O about a month ago now is this example, which allows people to utilize both images and text to search for items they want. So in the example here, you can snap a photo of the item that you're out to dinner eating and then specify that you actually want to find out recipes for it or places near me that you could buy a dish like that. And using all of the information that we have in images in our index, we can figure out what you're trying to find and then customize and tweak it using the search terms that you've added onto it. Another one that's really interesting and integrated here is maps, obviously. So for anyone with a physical environment, we, of course, see a huge amount of search volume coming through in the Maps platform as well. So it's really important that you have that, your physical locations and all of your Google My Business listings as up-to-date as possible, because it is a real communication channel with your customers, and there's a whole lot of options in there, including ways that you can communicate with them, surface what's going on in your stores on a given day, or what are the additional safety measures that you're taking as COVID sort of ramps up and down. So there's lots of options that you can utilize on these platforms already. So we've seen a huge change in behavior, and that has continued to just accelerate over these last couple of years. So again, we start asking the questions around how can we anticipate? How can we actually utilize these changes or figure out what to do with them? And again, we can't predict all of them, but with the right structure, you can start to react faster, and you might get ahead of one or two of the curves. We have to meet it by shifting the way that we do things, and if we can make those changes, then it's a real opportunity, not a threat to be realized. The first step on this journey is to recognize, I think, one of the biggest changes that we've seen is that shopping is always on, it's always happening now. And we're going to talk about that continuous shopping journey. So commerce, as we see it, never sleeps. We may realize one retail need and then immediately jump onto the next one incredibly quickly. And really, our curiosity extends beyond platform or outside of the 9 to 5 for stores. Example of this is how Kiwis are searching in the retail space. So we know that about half of all searches for retail products come through outside of the traditional 9 to 5 or when stores are open. And it's really interesting when we start to dive down into different categories to understand why people like to shop online. We can start to see that for particular categories, it becomes even more relevant. So if we look at consumer electronics, for example, we know that one of the main drivers for shopping online there is price comparison or being able to compare different models. However, if we look at toys, the biggest driver is being able to do it after the kids have gone to sleep. So people keep shopping even when your doors are closed. Despite this though, and I was really excited to hear so many people, and we've commented to a couple of people about it already, how much focus there was on the store environment today, because it is still a really core part of that. It's the most important part of that. And I think the numbers this morning said it was 86%. We've rounded it up or kept it a little bit more generic. We'll call it a different cut of the data. But we know that about that 90% of sales in New Zealand still go through those physical environments. People do like to go in store and pick their own items. They do like to go and have that choice, and they like to be able to pick up and feel and see if something is going to work for them. So there's no sort of illusion that online is going to completely replace all of this. The hard part for everyone in the room is really understanding which percentage of these sales are influenced by online before they go in store. And now I would hope that with that sort of 8 and 10 Kiwi stat a couple of slides ago, you would sort of understand that it's the vast majority of them are influenced. But we do have a number of tools at our disposal to help figure out or to really dive deeper into that. So things like store visits, which allow you to, off of your Google Ads or your analytics platforms, see the number of people who have interacted with your site and then gone into one of your stores, and that's done in a privacy-safe way. We work hard to make sure that this data is as accurate as possible, so using all of the mapping smarts that we have from our platforms, but also doing things like surveys to make sure that people are actually not just went in, but actually made a purchase when they did go. So having visibility on that starts to give you some idea of how many of your customers are going onto your site or interacting with your ads before they actually go into the store. But we can also look at the different ways that users are searching or finding information about your product set. So people have, I think it's been called out a couple of times now, are really accustomed to checking and seeing if something is in store before they actually make the trip in there. When we looked at some studies last year, just before Christmas, people were predicting that saying that 43% of them were going to make less trips into store environments. So they were doing more of that research online before they went in. We know that searches for click and collect have gone up about twofold since 2019, and a lot of that jump happened in 2020, but has hung around since then. So instead of dropping back off to the previous levels, we see these step changes where it goes up and then it stays at those higher levels because people build those habits and it's useful to them. So they want to keep on engaging with those platforms. We also saw that, that near me search that you can see on there is also another massive one with a 60% increase in people searching for products that are nearby to them because they're not as prepared to travel as far as they were previously to grab that. Again, it's that cheap versus best sort of view of how people are utilizing the internet to find it. They want that convenience layer as well as getting a good deal. Interestingly, we actually are seeing globally that the brands that were born online are realizing the value of this increasingly. So we only need to look at places like the UK where, and again, it's really good to see so many Amazon examples with their Go stores and things like that up here today. But they've just announced that they're going to be launching 260 additional stores across the UK to compete in the grocery space over the next 4 years. So despite having all of that infrastructure and all of that setup built out online, they still realize or recognize the need of immediacy, that people want to walk in through the doors and actually find more info. If we look at other markets, then JD.com and the Dada Group in China during different stages of lockdown over there launched 15-minute delivery for essentials, for a lot of home essential items across 240 cities in China. Not super scalable in New Zealand. I will give everyone that. But we should keep looking at these other markets to get an idea of what's coming down the pipeline and how brands are really capitalizing on that impatience element, how we can learn from them and we can scale up some of the things that really do work. I think the core message throughout this is to stop thinking about online versus offline, or God forbid we use the term omni in there somewhere as well, or across both. I think instead we need to think about it just as that continuation of the shopping journey. And I think Juanita's response earlier today about it just being total experience, or the experience across both, is a really good way of sort of wrapping it up. But I think where we really see that happening is the number of people who are shopping online while they are in store. So whether that's price comparisons, whether that's an example like this one. So again, at Google I/O, our developer conference a couple of weeks ago, where we announced this new functionality where using augmented reality, you can point your phone at the store shelf and see which products in there are highly rated, the different characteristics or product information about them, or it can help you find the product that is going to be the best fit for you. So again, it shows that blurring of the line between online and offline. They don't exist in those sort of silos anymore. I will shout out that with a lot of these platforms, by integrating or setting up things like your Google Shopping activity, you immediately get looped into the databases that fuel all of this stuff. So you will be able to utilize them when they do become available more widely. Outside of product data and having that really well set up though, understanding your customers is still a fundamental part of selling things to them or being in the retail industry. And having data on their behavior that is accessible and again is collected in privacy-safe ways is incredibly important. So the last item I'm going to talk about today is really that idea of agility through technology. Because there are all of these unique journeys that people are going through and these millions more signals that we can take into consideration. So talking to everyone with the same message, or even to an extent, breaking down those cohorts. It was really interesting to hear Dom talking about how that didn't sort of line up or didn't work in the real world. It doesn't sort of work in that same way anymore because customers expect brands to talk to them as individuals. Think about it. You wouldn't talk to every single person that came through the doors to your store the exact same way and shove the exact same product at them. So why should we think about our marketing or and especially our digital activations in the same way? Your first-party data that you are able to collect is really the big unlock for this. So it allows you to understand and respond to all of the hats that a person can wear. So in my example, I'm a new dad. So about 4 months ago, we had our first baby girl. But what it means is that on any given day, I can go from office worker to head chef at home to dog walker to nappy researcher, all within the space of a couple of hours. And so the brands that recognize that I am all of those different things and they need to help me fulfill all of those different needs are really going to be the ones that continue to build loyalty and get more and more and more of the customers in future. A big recommendation for everyone here is to really focus on or start thinking about the strategy that you are building out around your owned data. A scary number of businesses that we talk to in New Zealand still say, we don't really understand, or we haven't really thought about it, but we'll figure it out further down the line. And realistically, especially with privacy changes and things like that coming, you need to be on top of this stuff and thinking about it right now. So the big one from me today is go away and have some conversations with your teams around how you can really build a strategy around that owned and your owned first-party data. For those with store networks, having this data and understanding how your customers are interacting across those different environments is incredibly important. And what it allows you to do is identify your most valuable customers. So we quite often know that the customers sitting in this middle bucket that shop online and off end up becoming a brand's most valuable ones. They have higher loyalty, they have increased shopping frequency, and they typically have higher basket sizes as well. So it can start as simply as looking at how you might talk to each of these groups differently, but then really trying to drill down and understand who are the most valuable customers inside of each one of them, and how can we customize our services so that it's working better for those types. But also, how can we start to find more customers who look just like those ones? Companies that link all of that first-party data and start to activate off of it, I think there were some other good examples of where the first-party data was utilized and generated a much higher return on ad spend earlier. But yeah, typically we see about 1.5 times more efficiency out of any media investment once you've overlaid that data. So it does make a really big difference. To utilize this data, though, we need to think slightly differently about how we approach our marketing. And in the past, your marketing team would pull together a big plan for over the entire year. They'd spend that time building personas. They'd make plans and figure out specific audiences to talk to and how long we should be talking to them for and when we should be in and out of market. And there would be a campaign strategy, sort of painstakingly thought out and aligned creative, and you'd choose all of these elements and then send it out, and hopefully it would work in the world. All of the changes in behavior and increases in searches and all of the different sort of platforms that we have access to really mean that that's not as viable as it used to be. It doesn't work in the same way. And instead, we need to think about the role of marketing to not just be reach and frequency, but really reaching the right person at the right time, at the moment that it's going to make the biggest impact on driving them to come and buy from you. So when we're talking about automation, this is really the core of this. So we think about things like targeting. Is the user about to purchase, or should we not, or are they just in those early stages of research? Should we be talking to them now? We think about creative and what message is going to resonate best with them at a given moment. And then finally, bidding or the cost environment. How much should we be paying for them? Are they going to be a high value or a low value customer? And how should we talk to those differently? How should we price up how much we're prepared to pay for those? This really is where Google can help a lot. So through machine learning and automation, we can help you gather and access all of those millions of different interactions and provide a lot of the insight on what's happening outside of your site or your stores or your environment. So we can overlay with a lot of that. What it means, though, is that you need to tell us your business objectives, and then we can help align the systems or get our systems to really drive those. We can use all of those signals that we have at our disposal to understand the different stages that a user is in and really drive that performance layer. And so you go, easy, right? Google's going to do all the hard work for us. Not exactly. It's not quite as clear-cut as that. And the biggest challenge is that you really need to be driving your wider business goals. So marketing is not just their role. Technology, it's not just their role. Creative, it's not just their role. We need to get buy-in across the entire business to change the way that we are thinking about this and really activate off of it. So in your everyday marketing strategy, it means being super clear on what are those objectives that really drive your business forward. Because it can be tough to ignore a lot of those traditional marketing metrics, like, but really it doesn't matter how much your click-through rate is if you are driving more revenue for your business at the end of the day. It doesn't matter what an individual CPC is if it got somebody to come in store and to make a purchase as long as it's profitable. So a lot of people sort of go, oh, great, but we want to get to that we want to get to nirvana. We want to go to lifetime value and understanding predictive modeling of who's going to be our most valuable customers. That's what Amazon does, right? And that's their competitive edge. They've got all that data. I would say to everyone here, don't let that be an obstacle. You're better off going with something rather than nothing when it comes to those business objectives. So if you can optimize towards revenue rather than click-through rates, do that. But don't let perfection get in the way of progress. I think this is a really interesting one because I'm going to sort of contradict something that I think that Rupert talked about earlier, and that we talk about AI and automation and how that's taking away from people. I see it as something completely different. Everyone's an individual, and we want to be talked to differently. So really, I would say that this is an opportunity to think more about how you are doing creative and how you can, instead of taking a one-size-fits-all approach, customize those messages so that they resonate better with individuals. Like we said before, this is not this is not something that just one part of your business can do. Everyone needs to buy into it. So instead of having your one ad that you push out to everyone, you might have 20 different variations that talk to really different customer needs. And there's still an opportunity for you to do that at an individual person level, but you're talking to someone about stuff that matters to them. Selling them on the things that matter more to them than matter to the mass or the majority. So yeah, you might have 20 or 30 different variations along with thousands of products that show up in your shopping catalog. But traditionally, it would have been impossible to do that filtering based on who should see what. But now, activating these platforms, it is becoming an option. So lean into it. All right, I'm going to do a wrap up now. So we know that not every business has the ability to sort of change or transform this stuff overnight. So every business can and should start thinking about how they can build out these muscles and this skill set today, though. So first one up. So take the time to understand your consumers' behavior more and how those changes in behavior are really affecting the way they interact with your business. So are they going online before they go in store? Yes, they are. How many of them are doing it? How can we understand that better? Understanding these will really allow you to have that best engagement with them and really tie in more of those environments together. And a big part of that is thinking about that first-party data strategy. Then consider what that behavior really means to the role of your store environments or your physical environments. So there's a significant opportunity to use digital to drive more purchases in those environments. Just make sure that you are properly valuing it and understanding how much value it's actually driving. A huge part of that, and it was talked about earlier, is that breaking down the silos inside of the business. So if you have an e-commerce team that is only focused on driving e-commerce results, they're going to be doing that at the detriment of overall value to the business. So how can you get elevate those business goals to be more of everyone's focus? And finally, invest in your digital capabilities to make sure that you can actually bring all of this stuff to life. So I'm talking more about working or partnering with Google. It's how are you thinking about how your business is structured, breaking down those silos? How are you thinking about the platforms that you use to bring this to life? How are you attracting good talent by being a digitally led company that people want to actually work for? And because all of this will really affect your ability to make the most of those customer insights and the automated solutions and everything else I've talked about, it does really need to be a really key and core part of your business planning and strategy moving forward. So I hope everyone got something out of that and can figure out or has got a bit of an idea around how they can realize commerce everywhere, because it is happening everywhere and at all the time. I'm going to hand over now, and I'm looking forward to some questions later on.